You're in the right place. Let's get into it. Hello, Tabbin. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm really well. Thank you so much for inviting me along.
No worries. It's been a long time coming. We've been trying to set it up for a while, and I'm really excited for people to hear your story because it's so different to what I've had on the podcast before. So I'm going to start with a question which I ask everyone, and the first question I'd like to ask you is, what is your earliest memory of alcohol?
I've listened to your podcast and I've heard you ask other people that. I honestly don't know my earliest memory. Certainly, I can remember other people drinking, as in all the adults around me, from my very earliest memories. As far as my own drinking, I think it was probably sneaking sips of grown-ups drinks at if our parents had people around for a drink. And I know that certainly by the time I was sort of going off, to sort of secondary school, I had definitely had alcohol quite often by that stage. So by the age of 10, just taking sips from glasses. It wasn't kind of offered to me, but I just helped myself.
Yeah.
And that probably my grandmother used to drink this stuff called Cinzano, which was like martini and quite sweet. And she used to mix it with gin, but she also had it to loose. And I definitely can remember sort of having it, not particularly proud of it, but having a swig from the Cinzano bottle, that was on the sideboard and she wasn't looking. And that would have been at the age of 11 or 12. Yeah, I guess. So
Then do you remember kind of, I know it's such a long time ago and it's hard to go back, but do you remember how that kind of made you feel and why you felt the need to sort of have that first sip of Cinzano?
yeah, it was sweet and palatable, but I also loved that warm feeling, that almost slightly burny feeling, because it's actually quite a strong, it's a vermouth, so it's like fortified wine with all sorts of herbs and stuff. So it was quite strong, quite potent. But initially it was out of like being a bit naughty and trying to, thinking it was a grown-up thing to do. It wasn't instantly, oh, I love this, it's numbing me out at all. But I liked that slight burn.
Yeah. And how do you say your sort of drinking progressed then as you got sort of older? And I guess you touched on secondary school, and that period where you go from maybe having a sip to actually partaking in drinking alcohol with friends or going out. How did that look for you?
Yeah, I mean, certainly by the time I was, say, 16, I would have been drinking quite regularly, I think, partly at home. Just, my parents wouldn't have encouraged it, but they would have turned a blind eye, I think. And certainly like at friends' houses and that thing where you sort of sneak a bottle and I'm sure every teenager's done it, where you take the spirits bottle and you drink some of it and then top it up with water so it doesn't look like you've had anything, doing all of that sort of stuff. So, and we used to also go to the pub. I live in a rural area and this is very close to where I grew up. And so going to the pub with friends and drinking, I live in Devon, quite a bit of cider, lager. I didn't really like bitter then, or things like Cinzano or gin and tonic. So by the time I went to university, I was definitely a fairly accomplished social drinker, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. And would you say it was still quite fun at that stage of
Oh,
your
yeah.
life?
Yeah. 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 I mean, the occasional serious hangover was not fun, but mostly I wasn't drinking that much. It was just very, very regular. And not really, university occasionally, some big night out, but mostly it was just the consistency of it, really. And I think at uni, I didn't have enough money to get drunk every night.
Yeah, yeah, I can. I kind of resonate with that as well. That kind of started out it's such a cultural thing, isn't it? And it's so
Yeah. Yeah.
normalized. And I mean, obviously, you, for people that don't know, you have a book, and it all talks about, workplace culture. So I was going to ask you, how did your drinking change as you jumped into work and you went
Yeah,
into your working life?
it really did. I once I'd left university, I went into advertising, which is a I mean, I'm quite old, so we're talking in the mid 80s, and I just loved it because it was so boozy. That was, I mean, I wouldn't have said because it was boozy. I would have said because it's very sociable. But sociable and booze kind of meant the same thing to me. Uh, but I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but I could literally be out to lunch in every sense of the word 5 days a week. Uh, I was the Although advertising agencies have their own clients, as I was in the media department, so I planned and bought space on behalf of my clients. So I was the client for the media owners, the TV stations, the radio stations, the newspapers, magazines, etc. And I had a real cross section of clients. So I had a lot of media owners who wanted to get to know me, the principle being that you do more business with people that you've got to know well. Um, and so I was just, being asked out for lunch. Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, let's have a lunch to celebrate that or whatever. And I could be out 5 days a week and frequently was. And those lunches always involved booze. Just, it was, I don't, it would have been really weird to go out to lunch with somebody and not drink back in the day. Um, and then, of course, you'd go to the pub in the evening and see your friends, or mix with work colleagues who were also friends. So that sort of pattern of daily drinking, and quite a lot as well. We're talking, especially at the back end of the week, you could easily be doing like gin and tonic beforehand, wine with your lunch, and maybe even a glass of port or something afterwards. So, yeah, and it became normal just to drink a lot. And I thought everybody else did it. Didn't really realise it was just me.
I was going to ask that was, because you're talking about the 80s, and I think times have changed slightly,
Mm.
but there definitely still is a drinking culture within the workplace. I work in construction, and it is the done thing. You don't, you finish a job, and the way you celebrate is by going to the pub.
Yeah,
When you don't hit a milestone on site, you go to not celebrate. You do the opposite, but you do
yeah.
that with a drink. What was it like with your employer? And you touched on something quite interesting there. You said you thought everybody else was doing it, but you realised they wasn't. How was you functioning at work with doing this kind of stuff?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think most people in the advertising industry, profession, business, whatever you want to call it, most were drinking pretty heavily. And so, and I was doing fine. I mean, I was getting promoted and, you know, winning awards for my planning work. I just I always wonder how much better I could have been if alcohol hadn't been such a big part. But it did also mean that I got to know people, and that was part of the game. It was very much a sort of work hard, play hard culture then. And I think that the um, alcohol kind of lubricated everything. The sort of the building relationships and bonding with people, but we also had that sort of, like your group head would say, okay, well, everybody over to the pub. I'm buying tonight, so you'd get that sort of team spirit and camaraderie as well from those sort of evenings. And inevitably, there would be some sort of hilarious story the following day about somebody having done something stupid because they were drunk. Got on the tube and fallen asleep, or a lot of it actually quite dangerous, but
Yeah,
it
I
just all
resonate
seemed
with
like
that.
a
I
laugh at the
remember
time.
it was almost a badge of honor if you would go out, and whoever would come in to site, as long as you turned up on time,
Yeah.
and you had a story to tell. It was almost like a battle of who had the crazier evening. Um,
Mm, mm.
I was interested to sort of understand how your drinking progressed, and at what stage did you kind of think you started to question your relationship with alcohol?
I'd got married and we had two children, and in the lead up, sort of, I can remember thinking, when I get pregnant, am I going to find it easy or has alcohol got a bit too much of a hold on me? But I found it really, really easy to stop drinking during pregnancy. So, and I hear that from so many people who are actually in quite a lot of trouble with alcohol, but kind of we kid ourselves that because it was easy not to drink in pregnancy, we can't be a inverted commas alcoholic. I don't like the term alcoholic, but we kind of kid ourselves that everything's fine. But of course, there's such strong motivation to be alcohol free during pregnancy, and even my children are in their early 30s now, but even then, it was kind of socially completely unacceptable to drink during pregnancy. So one, you want the very best for your baby, and secondly, you know that you would face a load of judgment if you did drink. So it's kind of not an issue. But after they were both born, I was quite quickly back to my normal drinking patterns. And I think I thought then, not sure that, I really want to be doing this. And of course, if you've got a small baby who needs attention in the early hours of the morning, you can't just turn over and take another paracetamol and go back to sleep. You've got to get up. So, and I at that point, I started thinking, kind of, oh God, am I turning into my mother? Because she had a problem with alcohol. And I think it really sort of hit home a bit more. We left London and moved back to Devon. And the children were 6 and 4 when we moved. And that was quite a big lifestyle change in that up until then I'd been full-time working mum, going into the office every day. And by then, maybe not going out quite so often at lunchtimes because I wanted to get home in the evening. So I was kind of working harder during the day rather than messing about and then having to work into the evenings. But I was still definitely a drinker. But once we moved to Devon, everything was quite different. I was at home. I was working freelance, but I was working from home on research projects and stuff for people. And I was mum of 2 small children without the help that I'd had when we were living in London. And also my husband was away a lot. He was working abroad quite a bit. So I was at home on my own in the evenings. So the sort of sociable daytime drinking with friends and colleagues and media owners had changed, and it became me drinking on my own once the kids were in bed. And that's where I realised this is getting out of hand. So I just sort of, I mean, everybody who's ever had a problem with alcohol will recognise this pattern of sort of waking up in the morning, thinking through the previous day, thinking, oh God, what did I do? What did I say? Quite often, why have I got a bruise on my leg? What did I walk into? And then, right, I'm not doing that today. I am, just stop drinking. And then come mid to late afternoon, all I could think about again was alcohol. And it's that cycle of making a promise to yourself, becoming fixated, and then breaking that promise. And that was just horrible. And it left me really hating myself, that bucket full of self-loathing every day. So this would have been back in the early 2000s, I guess. There wasn't so much quick lit around then. There wasn't so much to read. I did go on holiday to New York. We were in the States, and I went into a bookstore in New York, and there was a whole section. Oh, this is brilliant. And I remember I bought several books, and they made a lot of sense, kind of like an intellectual level, but I still couldn't quite put that thinking into practice, if you like. And then I tried everything. I tried AA for a couple of years, and it just didn't click for me. And I don't knock AA because I know it's saved millions of lives. but I wasn't ever going to be one of them. It just wasn't the right program for me. Um, then I tried hypnotherapy. I read Alan Carr's book, The Easy Way to Control Alcohol, and that was the first thing I'd read that really talked about the subconscious, which was okay. The whole concept of this sort of cognitive dissonance, where you've got one part of your brain saying, I will not drink today, I don't want to drink, and the other part saying, yeah, go on, have a drink, have a drink. And realizing that wasn't just me being a complete freak, that was what happens in the human brain when you've become addicted to something. That was like, okay, I get this now. And the idea that hypnotherapy could suppress those subconscious desires seemed really appealing. So I read the book and then did a day of one-to-one hypnotherapy. And I honestly thought that was it. I'll never drink again. It lasted for 7.5 years. And I just didn't even think about booze. It was like so in my past. And then, but I hadn't done any work. I'd literally paid somebody some money and they rewired my brain for me. But it hadn't actually addressed the kind of underlying beliefs about why I liked to drink and what I thought alcohol could do for me. And eventually it worked and I was fine. I got through some really difficult times, the breakup of my marriage, huge financial problems, being diagnosed with breast cancer, all of those things. I still didn't think about drinking. I was, fine. And then I had an evening where, after my initial breast cancer surgery, I went back to the hospital and they said, yeah, unfortunately, we tested your lymph nodes and it spread. It was in all of the lymph nodes. It's a really high count. And suddenly everything got really super scary about where has this cancer spread to. And I was just scared witless. And when we got home that night, I was with my brother and my daughter, who was then 21 in her final year at uni. And they opened a bottle of wine. And I just said, I think I'll have some. And a bit like a Bateman cartoon where, all those shocked expressions, but nobody said anything. And I just drank it. And I wanted to get out of my head. Literally, we say, she's out of my head. My head was a really scary place that night. I thought I was going to die and leave my poor children with their father very unwell on the other side of the world and me in a coffin. And I just was terrified. And I just, that thing of sort of like paralyzed by fear. And I just wanted those horrible thoughts to just stop. And alcohol seemed like the answer. And yeah, I drank that night. I didn't get straight back into heavy drinking though, because I was back in hospital having loads of scans, loads more tests, and then more surgery, and then chemo and radiotherapy. And I was really fortunate it hadn't spread. So the fears were unfounded, but that wasn't clear straight away. There was a prospect that there was something on one of my lungs and they didn't know what it was. And so there was a period where that could have been cancer. As it turned out, it wasn't. It was just scarring from an infection, but they couldn't tell that at the time. So it was just a really scary time. But the weird thing is that having kind of broken that streak of 7.5 years, I was so quickly, within months, I was back. Certainly months of finishing my cancer treatment, I was back drinking and with alcohol as part of my life again. And that was just really frightening, I think, because I thought, I still don't want to do this, but I cannot stop it. I've tried everything. I thought I'd tried all the things. All I knew about was hypnotherapy and AA, and I tried both of them and they hadn't worked. And I was also really racked with shame because most of my drinking was on my own. Before, I'd been drinking socially, and then after the hypnotherapy, I hadn't drunk for 7.5 years. So everybody thought I didn't drink or I hardly drank. And I didn't want to admit, and that would have been the word I used, I didn't want to admit that I was drinking again. So I would have the odd drink out with friends, but basically I was saving my getting drunk for when I was at home on my own. And that felt really, I was really ashamed of myself for that.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. It's a lot of people I think will resonate, and they really appreciate your honesty, because there's a few points that you touched on there, and I think the most important one was that you finally, you did the hypnotherapy, but you mentioned not doing the work and not
Mm.
working the program. And I think, there's many ways to recover in
Mm.
sobriety, and there's many ways to recover from whatever you want to identify yourself as. I'll be really interested to understand, you're obviously sober now, you're doing some
Mm.
amazing and important work. There must have been a second period when you got to the point and decided, enough was enough this time. And it'd just be
Yeah,
interesting to understand the difference in your approach from the first attempt, which lasted 7 years, which
yeah.
is amazing, to, the second time round now, and what the differences you believe there are, and how you think what the difference was, why there was such a change the second time round.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the the way I finally did sort of find freedom from alcohol was through an organisation called This Naked Mind, which is the name of a book by Annie Grace and a kind of coaching program. And I came across them. I did that thing, and I know loads of people that have done something similar. I Googled, "Am I an alcoholic?" or something like that. How can I stop drinking, or whatever it was. But I think it was, "Am I an alcoholic?" And kind of, the answer. If you're even Googling that, you kind of know, yeah, well, there's something not right, or I wouldn't even be asking a computer to answer this question for me. Um, and I came across This Naked Mind, and they are an American organization, and they're very slick on the marketing and the email marketing in particular. And once you've you know ticked find out more or something, that's it. You're on their list and you ain't getting off. I read the book, and it made a load of sense. It was. The book is all about a much more compassionate approach. There's nothing wrong with you as a person. This is an addictive substance. Alcohol is the problem, not the drinker. It's the drink and not the drinker that's the problem. And reading "This is not your fault, it's alcohol's fault" made me feel just like, maybe I can stop bashing myself up for the fact that I'm in this mess. And it also goes into the science, so I understood much more about why I couldn't stop at one drink, and the nature of addiction, and that alcohol creates a desire for more alcohol, which it's useful to understand that. So and that helped me to understand why willpower just wouldn't work, because you're fighting against the scientific imperative almost, and it's really hard. But also the real game changer was This Naked Mind methodology of identifying beliefs about alcohol and helping people to see that it's a belief and not necessarily a truth, that it's just based on our own experience, but there is a whole sort of other sort of, you can gain clarity over that and think, actually, that's not actually true. And I liken it to, if you talk to an Eskimo, he will tell you that the ground is always covered in snow, because that's his experience. And so for me, my experience was alcohol makes things fun, because all of my adult life I'd been drinking sort of when I went out. And so, I associated fun with alcohol, but actually it's perfectly possible to have fun / more fun without it. I just hadn't experienced that. So I did a 3-month course with Annie Grace as my coach, actually, after I'd read the book. And that was just a complete turning point for me. The self-compassion, the treat yourself nicely, don't keep beating yourself up. But there was also one piece of scientific knowledge which just blew my mind. And that was when I learned that breast cancer, and several other cancers as well, but breast cancer was the one I was interested in because it's the one that I'd had. One of the known causes for breast cancer, particularly the estrogen receptor one that I had, one of the known causes is alcohol. And it's known by the medical world and the scientific world, but it ain't known by women. It's not known by those of us that get breast cancer. And it feels like a conspiracy of silence that we're not being told this information. If people know anything about the physical health risks of drinking alcohol, they probably know about liver damage. That's just about all that anybody knows. One or two people might understand that it can lead to raised blood pressure and therefore cardiovascular problems, heart attacks and strokes and stuff. Yeah, sometimes people will know somebody who's suffered a degree of brain damage, and that can be the effect of the alcohol, but it can also be the effect of falling over and hitting your head whilst drunk. So it's kind of two ways that can happen. But the cancer risk is just like nobody knows about it, and it's weird. I literally had no idea, and I actually asked my oncologist when I finished all the treatment and was sort of being signed off and go off, you're fine, you're cancer free now. And I remember asking outright, what can I do? What should I be doing to stay cancer free? And I got advice about eating healthily and make sure you take plenty of exercise. Now, that doctor and every doctor knows full well that alcohol is causing breast cancer. And if you look at the World Health Organization's website, that information's been there for a long, long time. These facts have been, alcohol has been cited as a grade 1 carcinogen since 1988. And they're just not telling people. And when I found out that there was this causation, not correlation, actual causation, alcohol causes breast cancer. It's obviously not the only cause, but it's a significant one. And I went back to the oncologist and said, excuse me, why the fuck didn't you tell me this?
Yeah, of course.
And the answer is, well, we don't like to shame patients. And I said, well, that's you putting a judgment on it, that I am now alcohol free, and I'm not ashamed to tell people that I had a problem with alcohol because I now understand it wasn't my fault. But you're putting a judgment, your own judgment, on people and costing people their lives. It's just completely unacceptable. So I get quite passionate about it because I just feel it's so, so wrong that people, and that's why I'm always happy to come on podcasts and talk about this, because it's like, we need to get this changed. In my view, alcohol should have a health label on it, like tobacco. It won't stop people drinking, but it'll make them think twice about taking it up and ask for help earlier, I believe.
Yeah, no. Again, thank you for sharing and being so open and honest, because it's I think it's something that we all know, isn't it? An addictive substance, no shock that you get addicted to it.
Yeah.
When you literally spell it out like that. I think the marketing around alcohol, I can remember growing up and every advert, I always remember like the Foster's adverts, people on a beach having alcohol or drinking a beer and relaxing, or if you watched a film, or even like Coronation Street, EastEnders, my mum might be watching that, and it was always someone has just died, you have a drink. And you touched on it there. It's so important to talk about. What more can we be doing to raise the awareness of the effects that alcohol has? And another question I wanted to ask, maybe you can answer two questions, but was you also touched on the fact that you realized the second time around and you worked this program. What was the program that you worked, and what those key differences? What were those key differences? Was it that you didn't blame yourself. And was there any sort of exercises and things that you would recommend people do who know they've got a problem with alcohol? They don't want to go to AA because they don't identify with it. But what are the sort of things they could do? And I know I've just asked you like 3 questions in one.
Yeah,
So
yeah. The big difference is digging into why you like to drink, and reframing those beliefs. So I think of it in terms of the jobs that we give alcohol to do. And those of us that get into difficulty with alcohol, it's nearly always because we're using it to kind of self-medicate from some form of emotional discomfort, of feeling that we don't fit in, or we're not good enough, or we're in some way unlovable. And really, it's only when we start to address those things that we can really change how we feel. And so changing it from, "Oh, I'm rubbish, I don't fit in, nobody wants to talk to me, but maybe I'll feel a bit better if I have a drink," into feelings of being at ease with ourselves and accepting ourselves as we are. And so often, particularly because I'm now a coach, and I'll be working with people and they say, "I shouldn't feel like that." And I say, as soon as you catch yourself with those, "I shouldn't feel, I shouldn't do that," just, you can just stop there. That is a big red flag saying, there's something going on here that you're really resisting at an emotional level. Why shouldn't you? If you feel it, you feel it. So just learning to accept emotions rather than kind of bury them. And it happens because we learn as we grow up. "Oh, that's not a good idea. Don't talk about that. That upsets people." All that sort of thing. Just that doesn't, it's, if you feel it, you feel it. So it's that, and very often when we go into the beliefs people have about alcohol, it helps me to relax and unwind, and have be better company. And people are there sort of, if you can reframe that and just say, "Okay, I'm feeling a bit shy and in amongst these people that I don't know. That's completely normal. Let's just be gentle on myself. I don't have to be the life and soul of the party. I can just chat to people
yeah,
quietly in a corner until I feel more confident." Yeah. So I think a lot of it is,
I think
and
that's
there's
great advice.
social pressures as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask that actually. That was kind of one of the questions I wanted to ask was, what challenges did you face, in your early sobriety? Because I remember you touched there on feelings and thoughts, and I think until you learn to process your thoughts and feelings, which is not something that you're taught, especially as a young man, I was never taught that
Yeah.
in school. I wasn't taught how to sit and connect with my breath and be like, okay, you're feeling a little bit stressed. Have you tried going for a walk? Right. It was
Yeah.
always reach for a drink. But, in your early, and it's quite a weird question because you've got two sobriety journeys. But
Mm.
if you could combine the two, what were the sort of challenges that you remember facing in early sobriety, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first time round, I look at the hypnotherapy as a massive and pretty effective sticking plaster that worked for a long time. It stuck for probably longer than I deserved it to, but I think that the challenges of doing it without hypnotherapy were just raw emotions. What do I do with these emotions? Um, so one of my kind of tips to anybody is to get a journal and just write. Just let these feelings come up. And there are lots of techniques and things like, writing a letter to your younger self, or to your future self as well, about what you deserve. Um, but journaling is really helpful. I think also that often we can be really scared about what life is going to be like, and we can sort of go future tripping, and get sort of all stressed about something that hasn't happened. And so being sorry, it sounds a bit woo-woo and Californian, but being very present and mindful and in the moment is really helpful, because you can't panic about the future or beat yourself up about the past if you're just like literally here now, checking in with your senses, checking in with your breath. And you mentioned, breath work. I think it's so important, because we can get really stressed and anxious about stuff, and then we've always got the tool of a few deep breaths and you'll feel okay. You just literally self-regulate. So that's been really powerful for me. I love yoga, and I also adore getting out for a walk. And I walk every day. These days, not so far, because my dog is very elderly and he doesn't seem to want to go for 5 milers. But I do walk in all weathers, and I think that is, just really helps to switch out of that sort of stressed mind state into a much more relaxed way of looking at the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to touch on what you said there as well. You said it's a very woo-woo Californian way of living. I'm trying to break that stigma and actually just say it how it is, because when you experience how life can feel when you feel connected to your body, and I believe in like a higher power, and everyone's got their own different things that keeps them going, but being connected to that for me is doing breath work in the morning and meditating and making myself feel like I'm close to nature, and
Yeah.
standing outside, with my shoes off and just
Yeah.
feeling the earth on your feet. And I think people, like you said, it's probably quite a British thing. Would you say that it's like that stigma around, like, what I find really interesting is there was no stigma around me snorting cocaine off of a public toilet at 8 o'clock in the morning, and all my friends would pat me on the back and say, well done. But the minute I said, I've done some breath work this morning, they go, why'd you do that? It's like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
do you think that's a British thing that you've noticed? And with your clients as well, do you find that that's something that it's that idea of surrender, isn't it? And letting go, and just,
Yeah.
the people
Yeah.
struggle with that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We do feel like we need to apologise for being connected to ourselves, and it's like, and yeah, I'm always being accused of, oh, she's gone all woke and stuff. It's like, no, I'm just, you know, I'm living my best life. Sorry if that upsets you, but I think it often reveals a bit of resistance. It says more about the other person, really, um, and some of the language can be a bit off-putting. I remember people talking about, oh, you just need to sit with your feelings. I just didn't know what that meant. That, what do I do with them? Put them on my lap? Sit, I just couldn't really, this sort of, it was too abstract for me. But when I read something and it just said, this is a process of accepting any and every feeling, because they're all legitimate, and not resisting them. If you resist something, what you resist persists thing, that's where the problem starts. So as soon as you find yourself sort of saying, oh, I'm not going there, that's exactly where you need to go. And that would, for me, prompt me to get my pen out and start journaling, just get writing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And most of my journal pages, my writing just lands up in the fire. I've got a wood burner. So I don't particularly want people reading it all. That I live on my own and the dog can't read, so it's not actually a problem. But it's not writing to keep. It's just writing as a way of expressing and exploring feelings. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that great advice again, and some people just need to get comfortable with. And if you can apply the same principles that you did to not drinking with doing these practices, and that's another important thing I always bang on about practices. They're practices for a reason, because the first time you do them, they don't stick. You have to keep practicing these
Yeah.
things, and the more you do them, the more natural it feels, the better it becomes, and then you start to realize, for me personally, when I don't do these practices, I notice a huge change in myself, and I notice my character defects popping back up. Because I haven't meditated, I haven't practiced gratitude in the morning, I haven't done something for someone else, and I'm living out of that selfish version of myself, which is,
Mm.
you know, flipping out at my girlfriend for no reason for something that I did, and it's like, hang on a minute,
Yeah.
I haven't. It's because I'm not connected to my body.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so true. And just giving yourself credit for the progress that you're making as well can make a huge difference. I think we're really good at beating ourselves up, especially if we've had a problem with abusing alcohol or drugs, and drugs. I mean, alcohol is a drug, but and we can be really good at sort of slating ourselves. So focusing on the good without being all sort of dismissive of areas for improvement, but I look at it as, well, I really gave the being horrible to myself and beating myself up a good test. I did it for decades and it didn't work. So for me, there's self-compassion and just checking in with myself and visualizing how I want to feel. And then you can say, is alcohol going to help me feel that way? No, it's going to take me in the other direction. So, okay, alcohol is not the answer here to how I want to feel. What would help? Am I feeling very lonely? Do I need to reach out and connect with somebody? Am I just really tired? Do I just need a few early nights? Have I been eating rubbish? Do I just need to get back onto eating more healthily? And am I just sort of running on adrenaline, in which case I just need to cut back on the caffeine and the stress and actively de-stress. So I've got lots of sort of tools in the toolbox now, I think. So
Yeah, I agree. I think you don't when you're numbing yourself with alcohol, you don't notice the slow changes happening, whereas like, for example, even this week, um, really busy week, and I could feel myself starting to get a little bit tired, a little bit ill. And I was like, what, I'm just going to pull back a little bit. And before I wouldn't have pulled back, I would have pushed through. And then,
yeah,
all that does is prolong the issue. But I wanted to talk a little bit with you about, what you're up to now, because you touched on, earlier how you're really passionate about sort of bringing the facts of how harmful alcohol is. And obviously you work as a coach, and you also work within businesses, and sort of talking about their culture with alcohol within the workplace. I just wondered if you
yeah,
could tell
yeah,
us a little bit about how that journey started, and what was sparked in you, because I believe purpose is another huge part of keeping us sober. And when you find your purpose, you tend to just get a sense of energy that you can't stop. And that's how I feel
yeah,
when I have these conversations. So I was wondering how you discovered the work that you do now, and how that all started.
yeah. It started out with being, finding out about this naked mind, and then I did a 3-month course and was alcohol free by the end of that, partway through that course. And my sort of big aha moment was having learnt about alcohol causing breast cancer. I was going to go and do the moonwalk, which is like a marathon distance walk overnight in London in aid of breast cancer charities. And the night I was doing it with my daughter and some friends, and literally the night before it, we were out having a meal, and I had a glass of wine, and I just thought, this is insane. I'm about to do a walk to raise money for breast cancer charities, and breast cancer is caused by alcohol, and here I am having survived it, and I've got a glass of wine in my hand, and that was just like this. I just don't want to do this anymore. So that was my sort of last drink, and that kind of propelled me forwards, if you like. Um, I went to a conference that This Naked Mind had, and at that, Annie Grace was talking about wanting to train some coaches, and I didn't feel ready to do it. I think I was scared that this newfound freedom was not going to last, because it didn't last the previous time. But then time went by, and a year later, she sort of said again, "Look, Tabbin, I think you would make a good coach. How about it?" And I thought, actually, yeah, because I didn't feel vulnerable and scared that I would drink again. The whole felt so different, because there was no willpower involved, and I felt really in control of all my decisions. So I became a coach, initially intending to just coach part-time, but loved it, and then sort of gave up my job to do it full time. And around that time, I was working with my own coach, who's like a business coach. But I said something, and she said, I was talking about workplace cultures and how a lot of people are getting into difficulty because they're being encouraged to drink at work, and then the addiction sets in, and then at that point they're kind of like, I'm sorry, I know we've encouraged you to drink, but now you are drinking and it's a problem, you're on your own. And I just felt that was really wrong, and we needed to change the culture. And I remember my coach Fiona saying to me, it sounds like there's a book in that, Tabbin. And I went, yeah, nobody's written one there, have they? And she went, yes. And and I, oh, and I was really kind of scared of writing a book. And I can remember saying, but I can't, I've never written a book before. And she said something like, I think you'll find that that's true for all first-time authors. Yeah, that's like, everybody starts somewhere. So anyway, I wrote the book. She helped me find a publisher, and so I wrote the book, and it's called Bottling Up Trouble: How Alcohol is Harming Your Business and What to Do About It. So it's about the harm that is being caused to businesses by people having issues with alcohol and employers just not being aware. So as an example, we know that absenteeism due to poor mental health is on the increase, but nobody is documenting how much of that is because of alcohol causing those mental health problems, the depression, stress, and anxiety. Everybody will know somebody who's been off work with stress. Very, very often alcohol is the cause, or certainly a contributory factor in that. But because alcohol is such a taboo, nobody will say, I think actually alcohol may be playing a part in my stress. It's thankfully now much more socially acceptable to say, I'm suffering from stress or my mental health isn't great. But still there is this taboo around alcohol and its contribution. So I call it the sort of well-being blind spot. And lots of companies are running well-being programs, but they don't mention alcohol. So what I do is speak to companies and say, look, let's just, first of all, just make sure that everybody knows the facts, because most people don't, like the cancer risk, etc. So just go in and do, talks on the physical and mental health harms from alcohol. So that's the first bit, where it's just, if people are better informed and not yet very far along the addiction cycle, they will probably be able to change their relationship quite easily. So that's the first thing, to just kind of stop the problems happening in the first place. And I also work with companies to change their kind of culture, so that things like, everybody come over to the pub I'm buying, or Christmas parties where there's a free bar and hardly anything non-alcoholic to drink, or just water, or sort of warm Coke or something. Just changing the emphasis of entertaining so that it doesn't revolve around alcohol. I'm not out to demonize alcohol and say nobody should ever drink it, but I think it needs to be one of several choices that things you can drink. There needs to be some really good alternatives, and changing the sort of, this is how we bond culture, and the just coming up with better ways to bond, which would vary from organisation to organisation. But it's also a diversity and inclusion thing here. There are lots of people who don't want to drink for religious or cultural, just personal reasons, and they should never ever feel that they're excluded just because they don't want to drink. That's not good employment practice. So there's all of that, and then the culture change piece, working with leaders to change the culture of their organisation, and then the final bit is making sure that the people within an organisation who already have a problem feel sort of like psychologically safe to ask for help, or at least know where to turn to get help. And it's a really tricky one because actually in this country, most disabilities are protected. So you can't be fired for having arthritis or depression or suffering from stress, but you can be fired for having a problem with alcohol or drugs. And that means that people don't come forward to ask for help. So it's up to business leaders to say, look, we know what the law says. Technically, we could fire you, but we're not going to. We're going to help. So, and that means leaders have to stand up and say, I used to have a problem, but I've been able to put it behind me, and this is how my life has changed. So, anybody who's in the same boat, come and talk to me, and we'll get you the right sort of help. And for an employer, it's so much better if they can just give somebody the help they need. It'll cost a minute amount of money in comparison to the cost of firing, rehiring, or if they're a really valued employee, maybe paying for them to go to rehab for a while. I mean, rehab is really expensive, and often doesn't produce very good results. So much better for the employer to say, okay, we've got you. Let's work this one through together. We'll get you the help you need. That employee is going to be so grateful and loyal as a result. But it just changes the whole culture of the organisation if people know that help's available and they're not going to be judged and stigmatized. So
Yeah, I think
yeah,
that's amazing work that you're doing. Talking to someone who has lost jobs because of my addiction, with drugs and alcohol, and all the stuff you're saying was the exact reason I didn't speak up, because I felt,
yeah,
the leaders within the businesses that I was working at were not inclusive of that, and maybe they
mm.
had their own problems and they didn't want to talk about the sort of culture that had been created. So I think it's amazing work that you're doing, and you should be super proud of yourself and all of
Oh,
the
thank you.
the adversity that you've shown to get over all the challenges you've had in life. Are just, it's inspiring. It's been such a lovely conversation just to sit and listen to, and it's given me inspirations, to go back to work next week and be that leader, because I'm in a senior position where I can make those decisions. And I think I probably, even someone who's sober, still find that there's a stigma in workplaces, and I still feel like I don't speak about it as openly because of the judgment that you think you're going to face. I think the work that you're doing is so important, and yeah, you should be really proud of
Yeah.
it.
I think it really. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, but I think it just. I'm really passionate that there shouldn't be a stigma around having a problem with alcohol, and I know there is, and I know that people probably whisper behind my back a bit, but I really don't care. Because I know that for everybody who's got a slightly bitchy or catty comment, other people are hearing a message which is really important. Um, and other people are thinking, oh, well, she's actually doing okay. And she looks as though her life is on track and she's happy. So there is hope. And that's, I think, you don't have to sort of spend the rest of your life in misery and shame and hiding. A much better life lies in ahead of you if you can just put this behind you, and it is entirely possible. You just need a little bit of help to get you going. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. So we've been talking for almost an hour now, so I've got a
Golly.
couple of
Yeah.
final questions which I ask
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah.
So the first question would be, what has been the biggest benefit that you believe sobriety has brought you?
Ooh. That's a really good question. Biggest benefit.
You can give me a top three if it's
Yeah.
easier.
I think one of them is that I'm alive, because I don't think I would be. I think I probably would have drunk myself back into cancer quite quickly, or something else horrible. So definitely just being here. But the real one is having a genuine being at ease with who I am, which I don't think I was, and knowing that I have I am good enough, which I just didn't believe before, I don't think. And the other bit would be the sort of corollary of that, is that the word? I don't know if I've used that
It's
word
all right.
right or not, but the other bit would be not judging other people for them being in a mess with whatever substance or habit, because all of these sort of addictive behaviours tend to be a response to emotional discomfort and pain, and mine manifested itself as a problem with alcohol. Other people, it might be overeating or gambling or sex or whatever it is, but they're all just human beings who are struggling. So don't judge them, help them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. That's beautiful. And the final question is, what is the one piece of advice that you wish you received at the beginning of your sobriety journey, which you would give to somebody else at the beginning of theirs?
That's an easy one for me. This is not your fault. It's your responsibility to do something about it because nobody else can do it for you, but it's not your fault. And anybody who gets, you're perfect as you are, every single person. It's the alcohol or the drugs that turn us into something that we don't want to be. So, yeah,
Yeah,
it's not your fault.
that's amazing. I've heard that saying before. You're not responsible for your addiction, but you're responsible for your recovery. And
Yeah,
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 I think that's such a great saying. So, where can
yeah.
we find you, Tabbin, if we're looking for you?
Yeah, I my website is called Wine to Water Coaching, and I called it that because that was the real miracle for me. It wasn't water being turned into wine, but for me turning the wine back into water. So Wine to Water Coaching, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook and on LinkedIn as Tabbin Almond. Yeah, and and if you go to the website, you'll find the links to the book, and I have a podcast as well, which is just debating alcohol. Really, it's not telling people to stop drinking; it's just giving facts. Yeah.
Amazing. We'll link all of your stuff into the description of the
Cool.
episode. And
Thank
yeah,
you.
just wanted to
Yeah.
say thank you again for being so open and honest and such an insightful, interesting conversation.
Oh, brilliant. Well, it's been lovely to chat with you and to share my story, and I hope it helps somebody out there.
I'm sure it will.
And
Thank
you
you.
keep going with your podcast because it's doing a great job. Really, really good. And it's so lovely to have a young guy doing this sort of work as well. Yeah.
No, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Brilliant. Thanks so
Cheers.
much. Bye
Cheers.
bye.